So now we get to the point of talking about concubines. Now, this is going to be sensitive, so I'm going to keep it as mild as possible, but I'm going to be very direct and honest with you. I'm not going to lie to you. I believe you've had enough of the lies already when it comes to this issue in public spaces. When I was 16 years old, I attended a very renowned circle of Islamic studies in London. London was very known for all types of groups and Muslim ideas and movements, as I said before, in the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s. And as I grew up in London, when I began to practice Islam, I embraced Islam, start practicing Islam, these were the first places people told me to go to seek knowledge. And so my first encounter when it came to the issue of slavery and concubines was actually in a khutbah, in a public space. And this was at the time when you can have a khutbah in public with the microphones and people can hear what's being said. So where I used to attend, it was public and everybody can hear, walking past can hear. And so the issue of concubine would be a recurring theme. How if the Muslims in Chechnya at the time, there was a war in Chechnya and in Afghanistan, and there was still after effects of the Cold War. And so as the Khatib was talking to us about the latest updates on the battleground, he would also tell us about the concubines that we could actually acquire. And he would tell us about the blonde Russian concubines, right? And the Indian concubines. And inshallah, one day we're going to conquer Britain and take British concubines. It's not a joke to me because I've actually lived it. So when I hear in 2024 people talk about this again and insist, it's just it's bringing back these very real discussions that I've heard before, right? So when I was 16, I said to the Sheikh after the khutbah, completely oblivious, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh, what's a concubine? And so he looked at me, and this is a man who was very fiery, very confrontational. If you think these people here are uncompromising, then you don't know what the du'at of the 90s and early 2000s were, the mujahid, the jihadi du'at, right? Uncompromising. And so he said to me, he looked at me, he went silent. Then he says to me, how old are you? I said, 16. He looked down, I'd never seen him this way before. He looked down, he said, they are female slaves. Right? And that was it. So now I had to go and understand what's a concubine, first of all. Female slave, what does that mean? So you keep telling us about female slave. That's what you meant. Okay, so what does that mean in Islam? Like, I couldn't understand why he kept talking about concubines. In Britain, for example, and Russian concubines. But now I understood. For some people, this could have been enough to confuse them or to push them out of Islam. But I kept searching and researching and checking different sources, right? Then I kept hearing excuses. For example, people would say to me, listen, concubines exist in Islam, you can't do anything about it, we can still have them today. In fact, if we conquer the West today, we'll take concubines, all right. Then they would say, in any case, it is better for a woman to be a concubine to a righteous man than to live as a kafira and to go to hell. They are better off as slaves to us, so we can make them Muslim, then if they live the way they live, free, but not Muslim, and die and go to hell. That was literally this was the logic that was being given as a 16-year-old. They're better off as slaves to us, good Muslims, than to be free in their own land. That was the logic. Right? For some people, this is sufficient. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They're better off being slaves to us than being free, not Muslims. But I had a problem with that, because for me, that's illogical. Why can't they be free and Muslim? Why did they have to go through concubinage to be Muslims, to be free from hellfire? It seems a bit opportunistic, if you ask me. So I said, okay, fine. All right, so that makes sense. Later on in life, I found various case studies in Islamic history that the historians and the same people giving this argument denied altogether. So they gave this rule, and later on they denied the rule. And I'll explain why. So let's take Ajara, or Hajar alayha salam, the mother of Sayyidina Ismail. Again, a very sahih hadith in al-Bukhari. It says, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he narrates from Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ibrahim did not tell lies except for 3 times. When he passed by a tyrant, and we know the story, to the end, the tyrant gave her Hajar. So the tyrant gave Sarah Hajar. And Sarah said, Allah saved me from the hands of a kafir and gave me Hajar to save me. Abu Hurairah says, that Hajara is your mother. Ya banu 𝗲𝗏, O children of the sky. But this was an endearment to the Arabs. And to be particular, the Adnaniyun, those who were Arabized. So he's telling them that you Arabs are the descendants of a slave woman. Now in most narratives, if you look at, for example, some of these Sirah, they will deny this and say, no, Hajar was a princess, not a slave. Hajar was a princess, not a slave. Because to say that she was a slave would indicate that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was descended from a slave woman, a concubine, and that is to besmirch the honor of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I say, okay, let's go back to the logic he gave me. Being a concubine to a righteous man, Sayyidina Ibrahim was a righteous man, was he not? Okay, in fact, one of the most righteous men after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what's wrong with being a concubine to Ibrahim by this logic? No, suddenly it doesn't make sense anymore. We have to change the principles. She had to be a princess. The other thing is, it makes Arabs as a category, again, Adnaniyun, not Qahtaniyun. Aws and Khazraj were Qahtaniyun, pure Arabs. Quraysh came under Adnan, the sons of Sayyidina Ismail, who himself was not an Arab. So the children were Arabized. But to claim that they come from Hajar, who was a concubine, would mean that they come ultimately from a concubine. And again, we don't want to hear that. So they go to a Jewish source, a rabbinic source, because the issue of she was a princess comes from the Jewish sources, not from the Islamic sources. So they would rather go to the Jewish sources just to circumvent the issue of concubinage than to stick to the authentic Islamic sources. So you could say, well, Ibrahim, we know that there's a principle that al-Isra'iliyat la nusaddiquhum wa la nukadhibuhum. We do not, when the Jews and Christians tell us stories that do not contradict Islam, we do not deny and we do not accept. This hadith you're giving us is not clear, because it says the tyrant gave Hajar to Sarah. It doesn't say she wasn't a princess, so she could have been a princess. And since there's a possibility of being a princess, let us take the best option. Why is there a need to insist she was a concubine? I will say because the theory of princesshood comes from the Jews. But we have a Sahih hadith that tells us she was actually a concubine, a slave. Where is that hadith? It's by the same Rawi, Abu Hurairah, in al-Bukhari. The Prophet ﷺ says, when Ibrahim migrated with Sarah, the people in that region gave her Ajar. And in fact, the name Hajar comes from Ajarha. Ajar. This is your reward. That's where the name, it's not an official name, it's a title from that sentence. Ajarha. Ajarha. So Hajar was given to Ibrahim. So when Sarah returned to Sayyidina Ibrahim, she says, do you know what, that Allah has humiliated that pagan, the ruler, and has given a slave girl for my service? So that concludes it. That's conclusive. Sahih Bukhari. Had she been a princess, that would have been information you cannot subdue. If somebody gives you a princess, the first thing you have to say is, I've got a princess in my possession. Look what he gave me, a princess. She makes it very clear, a slave girl is given to me in my service. Is it a big deal? It shouldn't be a big deal. Because Hajara alayha salatu wasalam is more than a princess to us. She's more than a princess to us. She's a great human being. But her being a concubine shouldn't be a problem, because at the end of the day, by this principle here, being a concubine to a righteous man, we should be happy that she was a concubine to Ibrahim. But we don't find that in the narratives. We go back to the Jewish sources instead, which tells you something about human nature. No matter how nice the argument is, nobody wants to be a concubine, or nobody wants their women to be concubines. No matter how nice the argument is, nobody wants it for themselves. It's only nice for other people. So, hypocrisy and double standards. Is that the only example? No, there's another example. Really? Yes. Let's have a look. So, being a concubine to a righteous Muslim is better than being a disbelieving woman, right? But isn't being a wife to a righteous Muslim better than being a concubine? Yeah, so why don't you just make her your wife? That's the higher ideal, isn't it? Why keep her as a concubine? So the second case study is Maria al-Qutbiyya, the Prophet's wife, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Same issue here. We have the same principle. To be a concubine to a righteous Muslim is better than not being a Muslim. Then we have Maria al-Qutbiyya, who was a Christian. When she was sent as a gift by Muqawqis to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with her sister Sirin. So here we have, in the book by Dr. Jonathan Brown, Slavery in Islam, it's a great book by the way. There is a debate amongst the Muslims, the historians and the scholars. Was Maria al-Qutbiyya a wife or a concubine? Why is it a problem? By the logic, it should not be a problem whether she's a wife or concubine, because she's married or she's with a righteous man, the best of men, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It shouldn't be a problem. But it is a problem. Because again, human nature does not want to attribute concubinage to one of the wives or the mothers of the sons of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you can make it as nice as you like. At the end of the day, nobody likes it for themselves. Which is why some scholars argue that she was a wife, not a concubine. Although the evidence, as he says very candidly here, it seems that only in recent decades has Maria been portrayed as a wife rather than slave concubine. Only recently has it been an issue. Only recently. Muslim intellectuals and activists have developed lengthy arguments insisting that the Prophet freed and married Maria. But Ibn at-Tabari makes it very clear that she was a concubine. He makes it very clear. He doesn't say she was a wife. Why is it an issue now? Why is it an issue now? Because of the apologetics. Because of trying to save Islam. Because of trying to show a better face of Islam. It wasn't an issue before. Furthermore, for those who are pro-concubine, they don't like the idea when you mention Maria and when you mention Hajar alayhim as-salam. They don't like the idea. They will insist they were wives and princesses. But why? They were with the best. If you were to be a concubine, there is no better choice of an owner than Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Ibrahim. There's no better. You couldn't choose two better men in the history of mankind to be a concubine to. You couldn't choose two better men. But even in that optimal situation, we still resist the idea because it's not something that is naturally. We don't like it naturally. So if we don't like it for our own women, we should also extend that courtesy to other women. Yeah. So it reveals a duplicity and a bit of a hypocrisy as well. It's good enough for them, but let's not apply it to ourselves. So he's very clear in saying that it's only a problem recently by apologetics. Then he goes on to say that it is very clear that she is a concubine. In the classical works, they make no excuses whatsoever. And the only one example given where it could be potentially construed as a wife is extremely rare and unreliable or ambiguous. Then he asks a very good question. He says, why would early Muslims propagate the idea that she was a slave concubine? Like, if she was really a wife, and as we're saying today that she was a wife, why would the early Muslims have any interest in denying that? What could be their motive? There's no motive. That's the answer. There's no motive for them to pretend she was a concubine if she wasn't one already. Yeah. So it reveals revisionism. And Muslims in the modern world seeking to reinvent the history. Yeah. But also, again, the idea for the sisters here, when someone says you don't have enough iman, you don't like the idea that Allah has made it halal, why should you be upset? Because when we look at even the best example in this scenario, people don't like it. The historians don't like it, the activists don't like it. They want to change it and make it a princess or make it a wife. And in the case of, if you go back to the Jewish version, when it came to Hagar, it is said that she was the daughter of Pharaoh. So it is even inaccurate from a historical lens. It's completely inaccurate. It's a completely inaccurate story. Yeah? Pharaoh, king of Egypt. That would imply, if we accept this theory, that Sayyidina Ismail was a son from a pharaonic line. Subhanallah. Look at the implications of that. That he was from a pharaonic line of rulers from his mother's side. Look at the implications of that blunder. So in seeking to answer one question, you cause more problems elsewhere. Yeah? So this is the inaccuracy of going by what you feel should be right rather than sticking to the facts. So concubinage is not something to be admired, to aspire for, because as we can see here, even in the best potential case, you could find two prophets, the greatest prophets and Rusul, Khalilullah and Habibullah. Even in their cases, Muslim scholars and historians find it hard to accept that they had concubines or that their wives were concubines, their consorts were concubines, because the logic is that will diminish the prestige of these women. Subhanallah. So what about the rest of the women then? So again, we find further, he goes on and on. This is a wonderful book. It's very candid. It's very direct. He's not apologetic at all. Not apologetic at all. And he mentioned there's only one hadith that people come back with as a counter to that. And they mentioned the idea that, or the hadith, where Rasulullah says, treat the people of Egypt well because you have a kith, a relationship with them from Maria. So they use that to say that is proof she was a wife. But again, we have a Nawawi who understood hadith very well, and he says no, she was still a concubine. So again, why the emphasis to reinvent history? Because the idea of concubinage doesn't sit well in the human spirit. Let's just be honest. Let's just be honest. Now I'm going to show you one example of reinventing the past to fit modern standards. Because when I mentioned this in a group, somebody said to me, yes, but there is a fatwa from Imam Shafi'i. I'm going to show you how that fatwa was not correctly quoted, unfortunately. It was misquoted, mistranslated, and misconstrued. So we're going to look at that video, the issue of concubines and consent. This is talking about, let me just give you a breakdown. So Dr. Omar Suleiman, may Allah have mercy on him and bless him for his effortless work. I don't believe in attacking Muslims. I don't believe in that at all. I don't consider myself even 1% of what he is to the Muslim world today, and I consider him a better Muslim and human being than I am. So this is not an attack on him. It's an observation and it's a critique of a specific historical account being given here. That's all it is. There's no animosity. I don't consider myself better than him in any way. So I pray that Allah gives him what he intends of good. Allah rewards him according to that. But I believe he made a mistake, many mistakes here. So he begins by saying that women have the right, when they're under slavery as concubines, to choose who they marry. They have complete right, complete consent. That's the beginning of that.
And one thing that's very significant here is they, even as they were captives, they still had full consent as to who they wanted to marry and who they didn't want to marry. So you can't force them into that either. And it's funny, but it's also sad. Barira radiallahu anhu is the freed slave of Aisha radiallahu anha. Barira was married to Mughith radiallahu anhu. They were both slaves, and Barira was freed. So Barira has a choice whether to stay married to her husband who's a slave or to go free. Barira decides to dissolve the marriage. And literally, Mughith chases Barira around the streets begging her to stay with him all the time. So Barira is walking in the streets and Mughith, this poor guy, is behind her begging her to take him back. And the Prophet ﷺ is sitting with Abu Bakr and he's looking at that, and the Prophet ﷺ says, isn't it amazing how much Mughith loves her and how much she hates him? Isn't that amazing? Like, as much as he's like begging her, please come back, and she's like she's completely ignoring him. So the Prophet ﷺ says, I'm going to go talk to her. So the Prophet ﷺ goes to Barira. She's a freed slave. And the Prophet ﷺ says, why don't you give Mughith another chance? You know what Barira says? You think about the nerve of a freed slave. She says, Ya Rasulullah, is this a command from you? Or are you just interceding on behalf of Mughith? Prophet ﷺ said, no, I'm just suggesting. I'm not commanding you to do anything. She said, if that's the case, Ya Rasulullah, I want to stay away from him. Prophet ﷺ said, fine. The point is, you talk about empowerment and reintegration in a society, like this woman is talking to the Prophet ﷺ that way, like, look, if you're telling me I have to, then I will, because you're the messenger of Allah. But otherwise, I'm going to decide to stay away from Mughith. I'm going to decide to keep that marriage dissolved. So their choices were respected. There is consent.
Okay, so this is misdirected logic. First of all, there's no such thing as a freed slave. You're either a slave or you're free. The lecture begins by saying they have the right to choose who to marry and who not to marry. When she was a slave, she didn't have the choice. In fact, the very fact that she was actually so adamant to leave him demonstrates that she didn't want him in the first place. But because she was a slave, she had to marry him. When she was set free, she became a free woman. Now she had the choice. Now she could say, I don't want him. So her choice to stay or not to stay wasn't as a slave, it was as a free woman. So that's firstly, it's a misdirection completely. Giving the impression that a slave woman has a choice is completely wrong. It's only when she was free, as a freed woman, that she chose, I don't want to remain in this condition that I was put in against my will. But it gets more interesting.
But otherwise, I'm going to decide to stay away from Mughith. I'm going to decide to keep that marriage dissolved. So their choices were respected. There is consent. Now, this is perhaps one of the dirtiest accusations against Islam, which unfortunately Muslims themselves cannot refute, and it disturbs me. Is consent necessary or not? Is rape allowed? No, it is absolutely not allowed.
Okay, so the issue of consent has become a hot topic recently, and he says it's one of the dirtiest accusations and that Muslims cannot refute, and it upsets him. So he's talking about consent. Now, he began by talking about consent. He gave Mughith and Barira as an example, which was not an appropriate example. It's actually the opposite of the example. But he's going to give us now evidence to show us that actually, yes, slaves had full, complete consent. So we want to hear the evidence, inshallah, and then dissect it.
Consent was necessary for this woman that comes into the household in that way, even though she's a prisoner of war, even though she comes in as a quote-unquote concubine, which again is unheard of, her consent was absolutely necessary.
So again, unheard of. I mean, concubines is all over the books of fiqh. This is something that is not unheard of. And to assume, to even think that somebody coming through as a slave has full consent is, quite frankly, wishful thinking at its best. The very definition of being a slave is you have no choice, there's no consent. Okay? So I'm not talking about whether it's right or wrong, but we have to be honest. We have to be honest. But it's still developing, so let's see what he has to say and the evidence he's going to bring to us.
What is the proof of that? First of all, common sense. If the Prophet ﷺ said that if you do this, you have to expiate a slave, then rape is far greater of an abuse than that, right? It's common sense, number one.
Okay, so at the very beginning of this lengthy lecture now, I've mentioned very clearly that I'm going to use Quran, Sunnah, and the sources of ijma and things that are very clear and solid with the evidences. I also mentioned that qiyas is going to be utilized by both ends of the spectrum. People are going to use qiyas because when they have nothing else to hold on to, they're going to use qiyas. That's one example of qiyas being used inappropriately. If slapping a slave means that you free them, then taking them against their will should automatically mean they should be free. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Okay, the deen is not based on qiyas, it's not based on logic. So again, these are small steps to get the person to follow a certain line of thinking that leads to another conclusion, which normally would not be the conclusion you would reach if you went through it with logic and actual knowledge. So this is going to be an example of effectively obfuscation and double talk to give the wrong impression that these rights were given to slaves and they had complete right and complete consent. The key word being consent. This is the word that's in vogue today, and this is the word that we're speaking to, consent.
Number two, there are narrations of the Sahaba punishing men who raped women that came in that fashion. So it was actually a punishable offense. Now someone might...
I can categorically guarantee you there isn't a single narration of... in fact, there are opposite narrations. I don't want to mention it because I know people have weak hearts sometimes, or I don't know who's watching this video. I can guarantee you, Sahih, the opposite. There's no hadith saying that if a slave is taken against her will in terms of intercourse, that they're going to, the Sahaba would punish with had. This is, it's unheard of. So, but he will not quote this hadith. It doesn't exist. So far we've had qiyas, we've had misdirection, we've got promise of a hadith. None of these will actually be delivered, but what will be delivered is something very different, which again will misdirect us completely differently. I don't think we need all of these acrobatics when we deal with this sort of topic. We can be direct. We don't need to go this far to appease people. But it causes a greater problem, because when somebody who is learned goes across this, it reveals that the Muslims are willing to take even deceptive means to cover up or to abstain from answering a question. Right? And this is not the best way to go about it, quite frankly.
Now someone might say, well, is there anything clear? Is this... And this is one of the problems, honestly, is that a lot of the material out there is either, very brief and shies away from discussing these topics, or it's apologetic and you don't know what to make out of it. You don't know if it's just defensive, if it's authentic or not. And this is something that I want to share with you all. Is there anything explicit in Islamic law that prohibited, because I forget now, but the article that came out in the New York Times, something about the theology of rape or whatever it is there anything explicit in Islamic law that forbade raping female prisoners of war and female captives? One of the earliest books of Islamic law, if not the earliest, was Kitab by Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. This is of the earliest books in Islamic legal theory and Islamic law.
Okay, I can say many things here, but our primary source is Quran, first and foremost, followed by the Sunnah, the Hadith. To jump from that all the way down to Imam al-Shafi'i's Kitab you're missing out a lot of information, because if you can't bridge the gap between Quran and you're only giving us qiyas at the very best. Right? Even Imam al-Shafi'i has to rely upon the primary sources. So it would have been better to just say the Quran or the Hadith. But to jump straight to Imam al-Shafi'i, it implies that there's nothing in between him and effectively his qiyas. Yeah. So let's see what he gives us as evidence. Undeniable evidence.
This is of the earliest books in Islamic legal theory and Islamic law. And I'm going to read it in Arabic, what Imam al-Shafi'i said, so that there could be no ambiguity and no doubt about what he says. He says, وَإِذَا اخْتَصَبَ الرَّجُلُ الْجَارِيَةَ ثُمَّ وَطَأَهَا بَعْدَ الْغَصْبِ وَهُوَ مِنْ غَيْرِ أَهْلِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ أُخِذَتْ مِنْهُ الْجَارِيَةِ وَأُقِيمَ عَلَيْهِ حَدُّ الزِّنَا. He said, rahimahullah ta'ala, if a man acquires a slave girl by force, and then he forces himself on her, and that slave girl, and he's, وَهُوَ مِنْ غَيْرِ أَهْلِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ, and that could be that he's either someone who's, he's Muslim or so on and so forth, so he's subject to the law of Islam, so he's not from the people outside of Islam, or he's not someone who's ma'dhur, who's not someone who's crazy, right? Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala said, number one, she's free. The woman goes free.
This is not mentioned anywhere. For those who speak Arabic, please, if I'm lying, mention of freedom is not mentioned at all in that narration. First of all, it just says she's returned back to her master. Her freedom is not mentioned whatsoever. So that's firstly completely incorrect. But let's continue.
Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala said, number one, she's free. The woman goes free. Number two, أُقِيمَ عَلَيْهِ حَدُّ الزِّنَا. The punishment of adultery is applied to him, not her. It's applied to him. And he must pay her something. So there has to be a fine, or there has to be something. So she goes free, and...
Again, for those who speak Arabic, there's no mention of compensation whatsoever. Okay? So this is why you need to learn Arabic, for those who don't speak Arabic. Right? You can be deceived so openly. No mention of freedom and no mention of compensation. I don't know where that came from, quite frankly. I've got the entire chapter of Kitab which I'll break down subsequent to this, but it's not mentioned at all in this narration. Let me rewind it for those who who speak Arabic to pay attention again. Freedom and compensation. Okay, let's see if that comes across in the statement.
Islamic law. And I'm going to read it in Arabic, what Imam al-Shafi'i said, so that there could be no ambiguity and no doubt about what he says. He says, وَإِذَا اخْتَصَبَ الرَّجُلُ الْجَارِيَةَ ثُمَّ وَطَأَهَا بَعْدَ الْغَصْبِ وَهُوَ مِنْ غَيْرِ أَهْلِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ أُخِذَتْ مِنْهُ الْجَارِيَةِ وَأُقِيمَ عَلَيْهِ حَدُّ الزِّنَا.
Okay, so for the Arabic speakers, I'm sure you're hearing what I'm hearing. There's no mention of manumission, of freedom for the woman, of compensation to the woman. It's not mentioned at all. Okay, and I can guarantee it's not mentioned in the book either. So we have to ask ourselves, how did this come into the text? How is it possible?
And then he forces himself on her. And that slave girl, and he's, وَهُوَ مِنْ غَيْرِ أَهْلِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ, and that could be that he's either someone who's, he's Muslim or so on and so forth, so he's subject to the law of Islam, so he's not from the people outside of Islam, or he's not someone who's ma'dhur, who's not someone who's crazy, right? Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala said, number one, she's free. The woman goes free. Number two, أُقِيمَ عَلَيْهِ حَدُّ الزِّنَا. The punishment of adultery is applied to him, not her. It's applied to him. And he must pay her something. So there has to be a fine or there has to be something. So she goes free, and and this man is killed, or this man is taken care of in accordance with whatever he has done. Subhanallah. It's as explicit as it comes.
For those who speak Arabic, honestly, your skin should be crawling right now. Right? That this is not, it's not excusable. It's inexcusable. And to put it in the mouth of Imam al-Shafi'i, to place these words in the mouth of Imam al-Shafi'i, it's inexcusable. I looked for 70 excuses, but he speaks Arabic. He's a doctor. There is no excuse for this. No excuse for this. But it's for you who don't speak Arabic, who rely upon people to give you information. It's your fault, quite frankly, because you're the ones who are not looking to seek the direct information from the sources, and you rely upon translations. And I felt really sad when I came across this. And then I kept saying, Ya Allah, please allow me to check the text and find another interpretation, or maybe a subtext that would justify what he said. I went to the source, nothing. Linguistically, there's no excuse whatsoever. There's no mention of payments or freedom whatsoever. It saddens me, because why do we have to go this far to deceive people just to keep people happy? Yeah? This is crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
So the next time someone asks you, what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on over there with these people, and you're talking about the rape of these Yazidi girls and so on and so forth, is that something that's permissible in Islam? Absolutely not. It's impermissible on so many fronts. But here in particular, consent was established, and it's probably the only system which actually explicitly said that a woman, even in that situation, would have to consent. Now,
So again, the consent issue is not established. I'm sorry. Okay, we have neither Quran, no Sunnah, no Hadith, no Ijma'a. We have only the Qiyas, which is misinterpreted, of Imam al-Shafi'i. The overwhelming stock, again, consent in Islam comes with the transaction of nikah. Consent Islamically, if you want to be technical, is contracted at the time of nikah. That's the consent of the woman and the man. And the slave is at the time of being sold. It's not, I don't want to get into the, but it's not what is being given here. It's misdirection, misleading, in fact, misinformation. And again, the emphasis on consent, 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 because this is what is in vogue in the West today. That's the topic of conversation. So we Muslims want to follow them and prove to them that we were first to do it, even if you have to fabricate evidences. This is really sad. So now he's going to talk about another issue.
In that situation, would have to consent. Now, if you became intimate with this woman, someone who was mulkamin, someone who came into the house as a captive, she now enjoys the privileges and the rights of a wife. She's promoted to a situation where she's now in the state of a wife. What does that mean? She can't be touched by anyone else. She can't be sold. She is treated as a member of the household, and she has all of the rights of a wife.
Where did you ever hear this from? Subhanallah. Do you think the wife of the man who brings a slave to the house is going to be happy that suddenly a concubine gets the same rights she gets in the house? In which book of fiqh do we find that the concubine, because the man slept with her, suddenly becomes a wife? I've never in my life read this. I wish it were the case. What is that? I wish it were the case. But it's not the case. And we can't fabricate evidences out of thin air. No source for this whatsoever. There's no source whatsoever. We're not playing with just opinions. We're pinning this on scholars of the past, right? We're pinning this on Islam. We're saying this is what Islam says, and the reality is not what Islam says. Now, we have issues with people who actually want to give a certain image of Islam that's not correct, but the other extreme is also bad, to invent things that don't exist. Right? So he made a lot of things with no and let's get into the text. Actually, I'm going to be upset right now. 𝗾𝙲 is an expert in the field of gender and Islamic studies. 𝗾𝙲, and she wrote many books and many studies. In fact, he quoted her studies. He quoted her article when it came to this issue. I've taken the effort of taking the Arabic, the original Arabic from Let's compare. So the English, if a man acquires a slave girl by force, it's very key, by force, and then he rapes her, and he is not an ignorant person, then the slave girl is taken from him. He must pay the fine, and the legal punishment for adultery will be applied to him. So let's analyze this for a bit. So the Arabic is clear here. The term اغتصب, what does that mean? لسان العرب, or Lane, William Lane. غصب. So this means he took it wrongfully, unjustly, right? Or taken another property wrongfully, unjustly, right? Or by violence. Also violated. So it has two meanings. One meaning is to take, to seize, to confiscate something that somebody else owns without their permission and with violence. The other meaning is to violate a woman, effectively, to take her without her consent. So it has two meanings. Now, I could say he's right because he took the second meaning. So if a man, basically, if we take this to be rape, he rapes a woman. The problem is, in the Arabic language, if you have two words that have the same meaning, you have different interpretations for each word, right? Or if you have two words that are synonymous, you take different meanings. But if they are mentioned in the same sentence, so if they're mentioned in the same sentence, إذا اجتمعت افترقت وإذا افترقت اجتمعت. If the words have the same meaning or similar proximity, when they're mentioned in the same ayah, in the same sentence, they have different meanings. But if they're kept in separate sentences, they have the same meaning. So for example, in the Quran, Allah says concerning the A'rab, that قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا. The A'rab came and said to the Prophet ﷺ, we have become mu'minun, we have believed. Allah says, قل لم تؤمنوا, tell them you have not believed, ولكن قولوا أسلمنا, say we have become Muslim. So in this ayah, Islam and Iman are distinguished. There's a distinguished definition here in this one ayah. Iman and Islam are not synonymous. But in other ayats, for example, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, the believers are brothers, it applies to Muslims. So you could say it applies to Muslims because it's mentioned separately. But when it's mentioned in the same place, they have different distinct meanings. So in this sentence, unfortunately, what could normally be taken as rape in the first instance has a different meaning. It actually means to acquire by force. Yeah, اغتصب means to acquire. In other words, he kidnapped somebody else's slave girl. So this is the different meaning that he didn't mention. If a man kidnaps or confiscates or abducts somebody else's slave or concubine by force, وَطَعَهَا, and then he has intercourse with her. So وَطَعَهَا doesn't mean rape, it means to have intercourse. Technically it means to step on something. But it also is a euphemism for having intercourse, whether it is consensual or not consensual. So it's not about raping her, it's about if a man takes another man's concubine, either by abducting her, or by forcing her, or by kidnapping her, however he takes her without the permission of the owner, and then he has intercourse. Whether she agrees or not, and this man is not غير عاقل, he's not insane, then the slave is taken away from him. She's not freed, she's sent back to her original owner. Because think about it this way, if a man takes somebody else's concubine and he sleeps with her, and we say to the concubine, you're free now, the owner loses twice. Number one, his slave was stolen. Number two, his slave was violated. And now he loses the slave, she's free. There's no justice for that owner whatsoever. So now she's taken away from him and returned to her original owner, which he tells us actually meant she was set free. Completely disingenuous. Furthermore, he must pay the fine to the woman? No, to the original owner. There are other hadith that actually clarify this. He has to pay the fine to the original owner. And the had will be applied upon him. Okay, so this was quoted and completely twisted. Completely twisted. But this was the only thing that was available to quote. But again, it's giving a wrong interpretation to what Imam al-Shafi'i wrote. He didn't mean this. Let's get further insight into this. So 𝗾𝙯𝗓 mentions, she mentions all four schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the madhahib, have a consensus that the master can marry off his female slave to someone else without her consent. So there's ijma' amongst the four schools of Islamic Sunni school of thought, that all, including a Shafi'i, that the female slave has no consent when it comes to marriage, which is against what he says in the beginning, that they have consent and they have the right. All four schools have consensus that she doesn't have the right to agree or disagree, so long as she's a slave. A master can also practice coitus interruptus, azl, during sex with his female without her permission. It's hard-hitting information, but I'm giving it to you the way it should be given. Right? The issue of consent here is not mentioned whatsoever. A man having sex with someone else's female slave constitutes zina. So this is what clarifies the statement above. A man taking somebody else's slave, that is punishable, because he stole somebody else's concubine. She's not free, she returns to her original master, and he's paid compensation. So it's a completely different story to what we've been given. According to Imam al-Shafi'i, if someone other than the master coerces a slave to have sex, the rapist will be required to pay compensation to her master. And in the end, it is the slave woman's marriage and not her consent which is an issue. So in other words, what made it wrong is not that she didn't consent, is that she wasn't lawfully married to that man who did that to her, or wasn't his concubine. That's the problem, not the issue of consent. So again, you can see here how really the deception, because you don't read. It's all in the details. I'm upset that it's been attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i with such intention, because you can't mistake this. You can't make mistakes such as these and present it publicly as the official statement, when there is so much commentary below that to explain exactly what he meant. But it doesn't end there, unfortunately. Fiqh, for those who say that there is consensus upon, Kasha also mentions again, she writes an entire book on this, concubinage and consent. So it says, an article. I'd advise you read it. Fiqh texts on relevant topics do not make any mention of consent being required between master and slave women. Yeah, that's the reality. I'm not saying that I'm for this. I'm just saying that let's be honest, intellectually honest, and let's not make things up. Let's not lie to people publicly. So there is no issue of consent between a slave and her master. It goes against the logic of being a slave in the first place. But it doesn't end there. Dr. Jonathan Brown, so you may say, okay, I don't believe that somebody as prominent as Dr. Omar Suleiman could have made a mistake such as this one. Maybe you misunderstood him. Okay, I agree. And I don't also take the idea that 𝗾𝙯𝗓 is an authority. She's a feminist. She's a non-Muslim. She may be a non-Muslim. I don't take her understanding. I need somebody who actually understands Islam. I say, okay, fine. I'll give you 2 for 1. I'll give you somebody who is a scholar in the field of history and Islamic jurisprudence, Dr. Jonathan Brown. He's a scholar, whether you like it or not. And a colleague of Dr. Omar Suleiman. How do you like that? Okay. So as a colleague, as a fellow Muslim, as a fellow academic, he writes a book. And his book is entitled Slavery in Islam. So let's inquire into this book and see whether he also agrees with the issue of consent being key and being granted. What does he have to say about this? Because clearly he's not going to be a biased source, is he? He's going to be an unbiased source. So let's see what he has to say concerning this these statements. So he has a section in his book, and I recommend people buy this book if you're interested in this. He's very candid. He's very candid. Consent and concubines. So he says, the master's right to have sex with his female slave is simply too discordant with modern sensibilities. This is not something that human beings, especially in this modern age, can handle. And that's a reality. That's a reality. It's not something we can handle. That's a reality for the most of us anyway. It's a reality. So he makes it very clear. But it's also very clear that we do not have to make stories up to keep people happy. We have to be honest. Right? So I have a lot of respect for him because it's very clear. He doesn't mince his words. So he says the obligation to provide sexual labor was a critical feature of enslavement of women. That was the reason why men wanted concubines. If you take that away, what's the point? So that was a critical feature. In almost every society in which slavery existed, this was the key thing. The right of a master to have sex with his female slave in certain circumstances was totally normal. Totally normal. Okay. But he continues. He says, what does any of this have to do with slavery and concubinage in Islam? What's the relevance? Why should we care about this? So consent plays no formal role with illicit sexual relationship or in initiating some rape. So in other words, consent is irrelevant when we look at the issue of concubines in Islam. He makes it very clear. It has no role whatsoever. Yeah. Then he says, in the case of slave concubine, consent was irrelevant. Right? Irrelevant. Because the master's ownership of the woman in question, because of the master's ownership. So by owning her, that's already consent. Right? And so he also notes, 𝗾𝙯, there is no evidence of any requirements, okay, in any of the books. In any of the books. So this also refutes the idea that Imam al-Shafi'i, being the earliest book, she says here, and he supports her, there's no evidence in any of the books. Reduced autonomy was part of the legal handicap. So that's what made you a slave to begin with. You didn't have choice. In Sharia, consent was crucial if you belong to a class of individuals whose consent matters. Women and men who were free and adults, they have to consent. But when it comes to minors, consent did not matter for minors, and it did not matter for female slaves who could be married off by their master or whose master could have sexual relations with them if he willed. So again, this is conclusive information. You can find the reference for yourself. There's no need for us to make things up. Right? We don't have to make things up. We don't have to make things up because the information will come out eventually anyway. And then he continues. So he's very clear. He's very, very clear. He's not making any excuses. He's very, very clear. Now let's take it from somebody who actually practices this or who actually promotes this. Abu Hamza al-Masri was very famous in London, especially in Finsbury Park, for those who live in London. And he wrote an interesting book. I've got the book here for historical reference. Khawarij and Jihad. And this is a book he wrote in 2009, recounting the jihad in Algeria. Okay, this was a major jihad in Algeria, civil war. It was a war that, again, began with young Muslims who want to topple the government. It's a kafir government. They went to the shuyukh, al-𝗲𝗓 and they said to them, I think bin Baz said, don't fight, be patient. And they rejected. They went for fighting anyway. So at the end, a civil war breaks out. To cut a very long story short, they go against the government. It doesn't work out. There's factions developed, GIA being one of them, Groupe Islamique Armée, GIA. And amongst the different groups, FIS also, the Islamic Front, they begin to fight one another, as is always the case. But in fighting one another, they begin to make pronouncements upon the rest of the people in Algeria who don't support them. One of those announcements was made on September 8th, 1997. So the GIA issued a statement on the 8th of September 1997 in which they stated that the Algerian people were kuffar, apostates and hypocrites because they did not support the GIA. So what does this statement have to do with concubines? Well, you could imagine. If they are kuffar and apostates and hypocrites, their blood becomes halal and their women are halal. And so they slaughtered, massacred, burnt, and even kidnapped and violated women who are Muslim women, by the way, of their opponents. So one group went and took the women from the other group, and they're both Muslim groups, and they did 𝗲𝗍. They did 𝗲𝗍. So what is 𝗲𝗍? 𝗲𝗍 is, in the subtext, 𝗲𝗍 is holding women as booty and right hand possess. Right? That includes access to the body willingly or unwillingly. So this is the raw truth from people who are actually on the ground doing this thing. And this was practiced. 𝗲𝗍 is also another theme, a reoccurring theme when ISIS arises. They talk about this a lot. In fact, they actually publish an entire pamphlet about this. And they cite certain early books that give them the right to do this. So let's look at this article that was published, a booklet published by ISIS. What is 𝗲𝗍? Question number one. What is 𝗲𝗍? So the answer is, 𝗲𝗍 is a woman from amongst Ahlul Harb, women who live in Darul Harb. So Britain will be Darul Harb. So 𝗲𝗍 would be one of the women in Britain, for example, captured by Muslims. But in that case, it was Syria. And in the previous case, in the 90s, it was Algeria. Right? So you can see how this idea of taking concubines, if it is left to fester, will eventually turn against the Muslims anyway. It will eventually turn against those people who live amongst those people who think this is a good idea to revive. Eventually, it's only a matter of time and opportunity. And so they begin to ask questions. What makes a 𝗲𝗍 permissible? Can we take them if they're believers or unbelievers? Can we have permission to have intercourse with them? Right? And so they call the ayats and various other questions. Okay, so I won't go through this, but it's very detailed. Very detailed. The point is, there is enough information out there to the contrary to what he said. Right? And the issue of consent, it is not an issue. You can see here, question 18. May a man use the 𝗔𝙘, which is coitus interruptus, with his female slave? And the answer is, a man is allowed during intercourse with his female slave with or without consent. With or without consent. Okay? And then it goes on. So again, you can see here there are many, many details. And in the original, they actually have the evidences, right, from which books they're from. The point being that we cannot pretend that these things do not exist, and that people who believe in this do not exist in the ummah. People are still applying these things and they believe in it. And in fact, when ISIS took over in Syria, many Syrian women fell to this, unfortunately. And many tourists came across from different parts of the Arab world to buy these women. These were Muslim women, right? To buy them under the guise of 𝗲𝗍 and under the guise of concubines or marriage brides, war brides. So let's share a video of this, where women are being taken, because these are ideas that they begin with a theoretical basis, don't deny Allah's ruling, and eventually become practical things that people want to apply in real life. And even Muslims will be subject to that, unfortunately, in the end.
𝗲𝗢𝗔𝗔's cell phone rarely stops ringing these days. She calls herself a marriage broker. In reality, she sells Syrian girls to men looking for brides at bargain prices. Of course she's thin, she told this client. She's been in the camp for a month. For many families living in Jordan's refugee camps, selling their daughters into marriage is the only way to survive. Across the Middle East, it is the custom for the groom to pay the bride's family. But their desperation is being exploited. Often the marriages are a sham, just a way to have sex. Some last only weeks. 𝗲𝗢𝗔 gets a cut for every match she makes. Young virgins fetch up to $5,000. You want me to get a younger one? She asked this caller. 13, 14?
How does that make you feel to marry off a 13-year-old girl?
Don't ask me, ask the families, she told us. It's the parents who feel it like a knife in their heart. But what can they do? We're in a state of war. 17-year-old Aya fled Syria with her family just under a year ago. She was sold to a 70-year-old man from Saudi Arabia for $3,500. He left.
By the way, at the time, this was known information. It was known amongst the circles in London and certain circles. Some of the men would leave these regions, such as the Gulf countries, on 4x4s on the weekend. It's like a weekend trip. They would travel to the regions where they could get these brides, consummate the marriage, and return back home. So it was like a weekend arrangement. Right? Coming for the weekend, consummate the marriage, and then go back home and abandon the women. Right? All under the guise of it's permitted because there's a war happening and these are people who are it leads somewhere. That's what I'm trying to say. It leads somewhere.
He left her after a month. This month was like a nightmare. I spent half of it crying. He didn't let me talk to my family much, she told us. But I had no choice. 𝗾𝙗𝗔𝗟 makes no apologies for her business. This is the only way for me to make a living, she said. Syrians can't work in Jordan. What are we supposed to do? Steal? Kill?
Do you have any daughters? Would you be willing to marry them off at 13 years old?
Impossible. I would die for them. I would sell my eyes before I sold my kids, she told us. But everyone's drowned.
Yeah, because nobody likes the idea for themselves. As the Prophet ﷺ said to the man, do you have a sister? Do you have a mother? Do you have an aunt? Do you like for that for them? Right? Likewise, those who want to champion the idea of concubines and slaves, let's ask them, do you have a daughter? Do you have a mother? Would you like that for them? Right, let's find a righteous man for them to be concubines too, if you like that. Right? Her answer is very clear. She's very clear with it. She says, never. I'd rather lose my eyesight.
It's a high price to pay in a society that places such high value on a woman's honor.
Do you feel ashamed by what's happened to you?
Yes, very. This feeling really never leaves me, she said. If I could only go back in time, just 1 month. But for Aya, her innocence lost and her country at war, there is no going back.
All right, so there are people actually, when there are times of discomfort and these kind of chaotic things happen, they profit from it because they have the opportunity to get fresh concubines on the market at a discount rate. So again, it's not just theoretical. There is a reason why people push for these sorts of things. So the 𝗖𝙘𝙇𝙔 at the time actually also mentioned that numerous men from Saudi Arabia were going and basically buying these women for short marriages and then leaving. And we have the infamous video of course, the slave market that ISIS was running. They were joking about checking the teeth of a 15-year-old girl, and this was real for them. It wasn't just an idea, but they got somewhere. They had to begin somewhere to get where they were. They had to begin somewhere to get to where they were. And that beginning point is to say, we cannot deny, we cannot speak about concubines as being no longer applicable to slavery. It's part of our deen. We have to defend it. It begins there. And then eventually it builds up until actually, if they find an opportunity, they will take it. They will take it. Now, believe it or not, again, I can only tell you what I know. There are criminals in the Muslim world, there are criminal gangs who genuinely believe that to groom non-Muslims, sabi, is a form of jihad, or at least they are right-hand possessed, milk yamin. They genuinely believe that, genuinely, okay? They've convinced themselves that these are sabi, okay? And if you speak to these people, they'll tell you, no, this is jihad. This is how we are effectively, this is part of the ghanima. We're in Dar al-Harb, and therefore these women are halal. There was a time in certain parts of the UK, certain groups would actually, there was a fatwa going around that if you have a girlfriend who's a Christian or Jew, she has to be Christian and Jew though, she must be Christian and Jew, that it was okay because she was sabi. Right? So it's permissible to have a girlfriend from Christians and Jews because they were right-hand possessed. And people actually act upon this. Right? So it's not just a benign idea. People act upon this. Unfortunately, it's usually those who are least practicing, the opportunists, who want an opportunity to effectively indulge under the premise of taking right-hand possess amongst the kuffar. Okay? So this is something that we have to be very careful of. Well, if you want to push that narrative, be careful and be responsible, because you may be part of something that is greater than you at the end of the day. You may be promoting something, somebody else could hear it and think, all right, I never knew that was possible, okay, and it's part of my iman, and then act upon it. Right? we have examples of, too many examples. Let me give you one example from a fatwa website, a famous one. So the question is, a few years back, I needed a servant for comfort and support and to fulfill my jobs. This man is in Saudi Arabia, by the way. Okay, I was able to pay the servants what they wanted and to comfort them too on their conditions. There was a young lady amongst them who agreed on our conditions. My servant was only there when I needed her, a bit like part-time employment. She came over and I needed her and went away when not needed. So effectively, they had an agreement. This woman would come to him only when he needs her. Okay? That was the agreement. But he's trying to couch it as if she was an employee of his, one of the other employees. So there was a young woman, and they had their own agreements, and that she would only come to him part-time when he needed her. We made a contract that she would serve me because she agreed and I agreed with my side. So he's not getting to the point. Okay, he's not getting to the point. The point is, hence, this young lady still lives in her parents' home and is not married. She agreed I be her master, so it gives me the right to touch her, and the rest I've cut it off. Okay? So effectively what he's done, he's finding a loophole to have illicit relationships with a woman who he doesn't have to be responsible for. She lives with her own parents. She comes only when he calls her, and presumably when his wife is at the house, okay, or in a secret hotel. And we have our own contract. And in that contract, she agrees that I will be her master, and therefore she'll be my slave. And that gives me the right to touch her. Now, if you think this is outlandish, I've got a video that was actually presented to Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan directly concerning this, because it was a quite common trend actually. People would ask for the right to molest their servants, domestic servants, on the premise that they were slaves anyway. Okay? On that premise. So you're not going to jihad, you're not liberating anybody, but you are hiring women who need money under the pretext that they are slaves. Right? And this is in the modern world. So here is a question directed to the Sheikh in Arabic.
أحسن الله إليكم. يقول السائل: هل يوجد الآن جواري، وهل يجوز شراؤهم والإتيان بهم من المملكة كي يعملوا خادمات لدينا؟
لا نعلم هذا، ما نعلم أن فيه رق الآن، رق شرعي، ما نعلم أن فيه رق شرعي. وأيضا لو جبتهم للمملكة منعوهم، لأنهم منعوا الرق من زمان، منعوا الرق. نعم.
Alhamdulillah. So this is one of the greatest scholars in Saudi Arabia right now. And somebody asked him, is it permissible to trade, to buy slaves, and then they can serve us, right? He doesn't get to the point, but we know what he's trying to get to, female slaves. So the Sheikh says, I don't know about this. We don't know about this. What do you mean slaves? No, there aren't any legal slaves anymore in this day and age. And even if there were any slaves that are legally owned, this dawla, this mamlaka, has prohibited it. Min zaman, from a long time ago, it's been made illegal in this country. So even if you do have a slave, it is illegal, and it's been illegal for a while now in this country. So we don't accept that. There was an attempt to get the Sheikh to give a fatwa that wouldn't permit for these men to have slaves. But the real reason, al-maqsood, what they want is to basically legitimate sexual intercourse with these women. Okay? So this is how far this idea can go. So when somebody is arguing about concubines, and the right hand possess concubines, there is a need. There is a need for the argument. There is something else beyond that. And these people are hyenas, because they are not the lions who are going to go and fight jihad and liberate the Muslim lands and liberate Muslim women in captivity in Gaza, in West Bank. They're not going to do any of that. They are hyenas. They are sitting down at home, looking for excuses and loopholes to find a way to get some non-Muslim woman to be under their guard as a slave, a legal slave, in a secret contract between the two of them, so they can have his own way with her. Right? This is what it boils down to, ultimately speaking. If you resist the idea of emancipation and it's no longer practiced today, it's because you have a need and a desire to satisfy. And there are too many people who actually have that mentality, unfortunately, that if they have an employee who's a woman employee, a non-Muslim employee, they believe somewhere down there in their mind that they have a right to their body, under the pretext of sabi. Right? So it's serious. It's not just something that is a historical discussion. It's serious. Now, if we're going to talk about concubines and female prisoners, then our priorities should be set straight. There are so many Muslim women. Dr. 𝗲𝗢𝗜𝗓 is only one example. There are so many Muslim women in the world who are captive under Jewish or Zionist control, the Hindu far-right control, and across China who are being molested sexually and abused. These women are concubines of those people. So the brothers who insist on fighting and to take concubines, your priority number one, liberate them first. That's your priority. You need to liberate them first. That's the first priority. Before you talk about capturing the opponent, liberate the Muslim. That's the priority that we have as Muslims. If we have, as I said before, we have captured some captives. They've captured. The first thing the Amir should do is liberate, prison exchange. There is no shortage of Muslim women being captive and being assaulted in Israeli jails, in Hindu majority populations, in parts of the world where Muslims are not as strong, in China, in camps. So our first priority should be to defend those women and to liberate them. Before we jump onto, we're going to go and take our own captives, and we insist that it's a right that we have to insist upon. Dr. 𝗲𝗲𝗜𝗓 has been in jail for so long. She was convicted for an 86-year sentence in 2010. So, by and large, none of us will be alive to see her come out of jail. She'll die in jail, most likely. So there is enough time for anyone who has the motive to revive the Sunnah in this sense to go and free the sister. Until then, I personally don't see any reason to talk about the rights to concubines when we have so many sisters who need to be liberated. That's the priority number one. Yeah. But up until now, the 2 billion Muslims, we can't do that. We can't liberate her. So again, I don't think it's a discussion we should be wasting time discussing about when we have more important things to be getting on with, quite frankly. And the same thing, Abu Ghraib, when we know what happened when the Americans were in Iraq, right? The mass abuse of male prisoners and female prisoners. I remember back in university, there was a letter. I don't know if it was a real letter or maybe just a fictional letter. It was called Fatima's letter. Fatima's letter. And it was supposed to be from a Muslimah who was being repeatedly violated by the American prisoners, by the American guards. Repeatedly. And she wrote a letter calling for the men of the Ummah to liberate them. And then she mentioned some of the sisters in the cell became pregnant from the violation, and rather than see the child born, they committed suicide by banging their head against the wall. This is serious. Those women were not liberated by these sorts of people who want to tell us time and time again about the obligation of taking concubines and having slaves. They have not shown up when we needed them. All right. These are things that happened recently, and we've never seen any of these people come forward and volunteer to solve the problem. So again, only siding with what benefits you personally. But the bigger issue at hand is not being dealt with, which is we still have women and men. Guantanamo is still open. So the priorities have to be set straight. Now, on the other side, you will find people who say, well, this has been a great presentation. This is amazing. I told you Islam is evil, and this is what they do to slaves when they have them. This is exactly what we need to hear more of. And I will say, hold on for a second. Don't celebrate yet, because what happens in the other side of the camp recently, up until 2949, is even worse. And it was legal. So again, before people turn to Islam and Muslims and want to point fingers, look at your own history. Recent history, not 1,000, recent history. And I want to begin with the Geneva Convention of 49. Why was there even a need to have this in the first place? Why was there even a need to have a convention that the world can abide by? Why even a need? Well, the short answer is very simply because the abuse of slaves and captives after World War I and World War II was so great and so rampant that they had to come together and find a new way forward. It was so rampant and so common that they had to come and find a way to prevent this from happening all over again. That was the reason why. Not because they didn't do it for a long time and they wanted to help the Muslims along. No, because they had problems in themselves. The Germans, the Japanese, the Americans, the abuse of prisoners, or female prisoners, at an industrial level was such that they had to come together and have a new charter of human rights. Right? So before you point a finger to others, look at your own self. And I'm going to give you examples of that. 49 is not a long time ago. It's not a long time ago. Right? So the first thing is slavery was still in place because they acquired these prisoners. They were not given the choice. They were not given choice to do anything, basically. They were slaves and they were forced to work, forced labor. And this is the encyclopedia of World War I, directly from there. So this article examines the conditions, forms and consequences of forced labor and recruitment during the First World War, especially in German-occupied northern France, Belgium, Russia, Poland and Lithuania. And so they are trying to post effectively all the blame, pin it on the Germans. But effectively the Germans also enslaved many people. In Poland, for example, right? In Romania, Bulgaria, they enslaved many people and took the women as concubines, right? And mass violations of women in Poland especially, and Germany. So this was being done in 1949, up to 1949. Then we have, again, this is from the Holocaust Museum. They also mentioned that the Germans also applied forced labor. Okay? So this was a form of enslavement. During the entire time, laborers died as a result of ill treatment, disease, and starvation. Examples of this can be found in nearly all occupied territories in World War I. Right? So that all occupied territories in World War I were doing this. Okay? So again, we need to put things in perspective. Don't get on your higher horse and point to others when this was still being done at an industrial level in World War I and World War II. In World War II, the Germans, the Nazis, operated several categories of labor camps for different categories of inmates. So it was so precise, so systematic that they had different categories. And they were worked to death. Right? And if they couldn't work, they were killed. So this is slavery in a modern lens, which is why they had to create a new convention to stop this. Then we have the Germans in Berlin. There was a massive violation of women. And let's just read one or two examples of this. So with horror on their faces, they told me what had happened the first night of the Red Army's arrival. They poked her, explained the beautiful German girl, a young girl. And she's describing what had happened to her when these soldiers came in. So she lifted her skirt and she said all night they poked her. They were old, some were covered in pimples, and they all climbed on me and poked. No less than 20 men. She began to cry. They violated my daughter in front of me, says her mother, and they can still come back and do it again. And so she says, stay here. So the girl says to the soldier, you stay here, don't leave, please stay. And then she threw herself on the soldier and says, sleep with me. This is a young girl. You can do whatever you want with me, but only you. So in other words, she had given up on the idea that she cannot be touched. So she chose the lesser of the two evils. Please, I'd rather you have me than anyone else. Right? Stay here before they come back. And if you protect me, I'll give my body to you. A young girl. Okay. So, and this was in World War II, sorry. See? He went through so many villages in which the Nazis had killed everyone, even small children. And he saw evidence of violation. Yeah, this is World War II. Then let's look at Poland. So in Poland, there's a book written on wartime relations. So Polish women were considered inferior. So the German soldiers were not allowed to have relationships with Polish women. They're considered inferior. However, what was allowed was industrial level prostitution, brothels. So the SS Army constructed purpose-built purpose-built brothels for their soldiers. The only thing they were not allowed to do is have loving relationships. So in other words, you can use them, just don't get connected to them, don't have a relationship with them. Okay, purpose-built brothels. This is concubines at an industrial level by the Germans, and this was 1939, 1945. This is not long ago. Okay, the military was doing this, which is why they had to bring about this law to cancel it altogether. And then Japan. If you know about the Japanese and their involvement in World War I and World War II, they had a system known as comfort women. And here is a picture of a Japanese soldier with Chinese. They would take Chinese women to be comfort girls. It's a light way of saying concubines. And they were forced to have sex with the soldiers. And to facilitate that, they built camps and facilities to facilitate that. And the women were repeatedly violated. Repeatedly violated. Right? So again, you can see the hypocrisy in talking about Muslims in the 7th century. And up until World War II, this was systematically applied. Systematically. And the government, the German government and the Japanese government, and Japanese government, made it literally a system for their soldiers. They facilitated it. It was legal. What about the Americans? Well, the Americans in Vietnam, oh my goodness, I mean, you could imagine, right? The violation was so widely accepted that, again, it was just known as basically a reality of war. And one of the authors of the book says the following: a true war story is never moral. So the idea that you can have consent and it's not reality. It is never moral. It does not instruct nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. So if you're talking about concubines and slaves, and it seems rosy and don't believe it, because that's not the reality of men. That's not the reality of men at war. If at the end of a war, if at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. Yeah? As a rule of thumb, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegation of obscenity and evil. So the reality is, the idea that these men are going to war and they're not violating women and the government is not turning a blind eye, if not facilitating it, is a fantasy up until World War II. And so this Geneva Convention is necessary to stop them doing this. It's necessary. They've signed up to this, and it's a conventionality that's not even 100 years old. It's not that old. It's very recent. So we have to face that reality as well, and not call upon ourselves, right? Not to revive something that the door has been shut, and if it were to be opened, we would be the biggest victims of that. Abraham Lincoln, he says, and I like this quote: "Whenever I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally." Okay? For those who want to argue for slavery, let's try it on you first. Let us see how you like it, right? It's always good on other people. It's always favorable for them. But when it comes to our own people, our own women, suddenly it doesn't apply anymore. So he's right in saying that. But even when he emancipated the slaves, wasn't because he loved freedom or he wanted to help the slaves. It was an economic arrangement. It was no longer financially viable. But when he got rid of the slavery system, or he emancipated the slaves, so-called emancipated, he wanted them to leave America. He didn't want them to stay in America. Okay? He didn't believe in racial equality either. He didn't think that two races could live together in harmony. He wanted 4 million Africans to be sent back to Africa. So this is Abraham Lincoln, who people will say he emancipated the slaves. But if you compare the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's words and actions in 7th century Arabia, and this being the best they can give us, there's no comparison whatsoever. Okay? So although he did it, it was purely because of economic and political convenience. And he was very clear, he doesn't believe in equality of races. He was very clear. I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about any way of social and political equality of the white and black races. Abraham Lincoln. Okay. Now, slavery still exists. We know that because there are many forms of slavery. According to Anti-Slavery, the International Labour Organization, there are 50 million slaves across the world today, right? And that obviously most of these are not registered as slaves, but they exist. And you can see that the definition remains the same. Somebody who is owned by somebody else, somebody who works for free and has no choice. And so we know that the prison system is a form of slavery. There's no question about that. Because prisoners are actually, especially in America, are processed the same way you process a product. They lose their identity. They're given numbers. And many of them are given opportunities to work for private corporations and are paid little to nothing. So the exploitation of slaves continues the tradition of slavery. So those who are in prison are actual modern slaves. Initially, when Abraham Lincoln liberated the slaves, emancipated the slaves, there was a need to absorb them some other way. There were some slaves who returned to their slave masters, former slave masters, and offered free services. Said, look, we'll work for free now. Just pay us, give us something to eat and somewhere to sleep. Because they couldn't find their bearings in society, in the new society. So they came back voluntarily and offered themselves yet again to work for free if they could eat and have somewhere to stay. So it was an issue in society. And one way to absorb this massive wave of newly liberated slaves was the prison system. Okay, so the prison system was invented in order to basically incorporate and to suck in that undesirable excess in society. And you can see here, there is from 1925 to 2014, a significant spike in the population of prisoners of color, obviously. And so it continues, but under different names. The prison industrial complex imprisons more black men today than slaves in 1850. So it's just another way of doing the same thing. It's been given another name, right? It still exists. And we have, for example, entertainment companies that literally the logo is death row. The literal logo is death row, right? It's a prison system pipeline. The music, the culture, the entertainment, all of that leads people towards a lifestyle that results in going to prison, right? So the system may have changed its name, but the essence remains. And of course, the most open and the most, you could say, the clearest form of slavery is Guantanamo Bay, right? If there isn't any other way of encapsulating what slavery looks like, this is it. Literally slaves. Literally slaves. And they're all Muslims. And they're all Muslims. Again, where's the Liberation Army? Where are the brothers who are going to liberate these brothers and revive the Sunnah? And this is only one example. What if another camp is open somewhere else, a bigger camp for more Muslims? It's not to our advantage to talk about these issues and to champion them, especially when we're failing to liberate those who need to be liberated in the first place. Abu Ghraib, again, this is slavery in action, right? And Dr. Afia Siddiqui. Right? So we have many things to resolve before jumping to the point of calling for concubines and slaves. In conclusion, I don't think we should be debating these issues publicly, quite frankly, if we're not equipped to debate them. If we're going to make up evidences and outright fabricate information, it's best to remain silent, quite frankly, because you cause more problems later on. And to stop responding to bad faith actors, because oftentimes people ask questions not because they want the truth, but just because they want to have a reaction. And no amount of bending over backwards and fabrication is going to satisfy them, because they'll move to the next goalpost. So rather than just fabricating information and misguiding people, it's best to remain silent unless you have good information to share with those people. But I think discussions about slavery, concubinage, and marriage age and stuff like that, it's not necessarily something good for us. Ultimately speaking, it's something that will only cause more harm especially if we're not willing to answer the questions properly and openly. Imam Malik, he hated debating, rahimahullah. He didn't like debating. A man came to him and said to him, debate me, Ya Abu Abdullah, debate me. Just give me one chance, give me one word. Let me hear. He says to him, no, not even half a word. So the man says to him, if you beat me, I will accept. And if I beat you, accept. So the Imam says, and what if somebody else comes along and he defeats both of us in debate? So the man says to him, we follow him. So Imam Malik says, you are like a leaf, basically. Yeah? If a person comes along with a better speaking style, you will be easily carried away. So you have no principles. He didn't like debating, rahimahullah. Also the issue of defending the sunnah. Because people say we want to defend the sunnah, we want to defend the sunnah. Imam Malik said no. There are ways to defend the sunnah. One of his students says to him, I know the sunnah, I'm a man of knowledge. Should we defend the sunnah? Let's go and defend the sunnah. Imam Malik says, no, don't debate. Just convey it as it is, and otherwise just convey it as it is and leave it. Right? If you don't know how to convince people with the sunnah, the authentic sunnah, and to give it clearly, remain silent. Don't seek to make things more complicated than they already are. Those who want the truth will accept it. And those who don't want the truth, you're wasting your time anyway. So defending the sunnah is not to go about discussing topics that have no relevance to today, causing problems and confusion, and at an extreme, inventing evidences just to support a certain system, that an argument that doesn't exist. Imam Malik's very right. Don't argue first and foremost, just for the sake of arguing. And secondly, convey the sunnah as it is, and then leave it at that. Yeah? Don't be involved in so many argumentations. And finally, it is okay to say, I don't know. Not every question has to have an answer. One of the problems is having people who have answers for everything. Everything. Nutrition have an answer. Politics have an answer. Spirituality have an answer. Relationships have an answer. History have an answer. Everything you have an answer for. So you become somebody who knows everything, but in the process you make many mistakes because you don't have the depth necessary to answer the questions. Imam Malik made it very clear. It's okay to say, I don't know, or I don't have an opinion. Right? It's okay to do that, and we need to do that more, because oftentimes many of these issues, misunderstandings, arise from a shallow understanding of a topic. And the insistence that we know it all, right, causing more problems. So he says, I don't know. La adri. Right? The other end of it is to be too reactionary, because oftentimes we find with the changing of times and the different topics of discussion, people change the da'wah. In the 80s and 70s, socialism was the big thing, to be a socialist. And people changed the da'wah to fit that narrative. So they would say, for example, Medina was the first socialist state. How is that? Ashab al-Suffah, they lived in a commune in the masjid, and the Prophet ﷺ would divide with them his property. So this was communism, na'udhu billah, socialism. And they took the hadith to meet that objective. Then later on, nationalism, hubbul watan min al-iman, a commentary from Imam al-Nawawi's Arba'in, love of the land is part of iman. So this is proof that we should be nationalist, during the Arab nationalism. They took that model. Then later on, democracy. So when the USSR is defeated, democracy reigns, and you have Muslims saying, actually, the first constitution, democratically speaking, was in Medina. Again, how? The Constitution of Medina. Right? So, and also going as far as saying that Jefferson had a copy of the Quran, and it may be possible he took the Constitution from the Quran. I mean, we don't have to go that far. And recently, women empowerment, feminism. Khadija was a boss. She was an independent woman. She would have been a CEO, CFO of a multinational company today. So we reinvent Islam every single time to appease people, right, who don't care really about our explanations. But in the process, the integrity of the da'wah, and also the sources that we're citing are being misappropriated. Right? We're putting in the mouths of scholars in the past things they didn't say, and that's not right. And finally, for those who want to attack Islam, you have more to worry about, because you have so many things in the recent history, from the labor camps, from the comfort women in Poland and Vietnam, right? Or if you go back in time to the Greeks, pederasty, widely practiced amongst the Greeks, right? Or in modern terms, namba, which has been adopted in modern terms, is a form of pederasty, but in modern terms. And these are things that you should be preoccupied figuring out and answering, rather than pointing to Muslims and asking about 7th century Arabia and what happened, why Islam did not abrogate slavery. So there is a lot to talk about, but I think it's just best to keep things simple and to stick to where we have strength. There's no need to invent false evidence. And essentially, as Allah makes it very clear, that you have a way of belief. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Very clear, very simple. I don't believe what you believe, and you don't believe what I believe. And I will never believe what you believe, neither will you believe what I believe. You have your own way, I have mine. Khalas, let's call it a day. There's no need to continually engage and exchange and get back and forth, except that you have a certain way of life and outlook in life, and we have another one. And if you want to learn about our way of life, you're welcome. But we're not going to continually engage in debates that have no utility whatsoever for the modern world, but only cause more harm. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. Very clear, very simple. And finally, for those who want the references, I'm going to do a quick bibliography review. Slavery in Islam, I recommend it highly. It's not very accessible online, but there may be PDFs. Darul Ishat, very, very, very relevant for those who want to learn about Sayyidina Umar and his reformations. Liberty's Jihad by Munawwar Ali Karim on the issue of Muslim slaves in America, their experiences. Slavery and Islam, Dr. Jonathan Brown. Very candid, very direct, very, very well referenced. I would definitely recommend that book for those who want to really have depth of learning. 𝗃𝗡𝗃, an autobiography, for those who want to know how this thing actually worked. What was his mentality? How did he justify it to himself? Right? Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. Okay, so the issue of trading African slaves, selling them on to the Belgians, to the Arabs, to the British, and how the Western people looked at it. It was something that was looked at as very horrific, although they profited from it. But the autobiography of 𝗃𝗡𝗃 is really, really, really important. Read about it. How did he see slavery? Does he have a justification for it? Right? And for those who want to know how it looks like to be a Muslim slave in a modern age, I recommend these two. The Mauritanian, an amazing film, right? And there are many documentaries, but the film is very, very good. And Enemy Combatants, Muazzam Beg, an amazing book, right? To see how it really looks like if we want to reinvite slavery in modern times. Okay, these were men, they're both free now, but were effectively slaves. And the treatment they received as slaves. And they were not released by Muslims, but by non-Muslims. It was non-Muslims who released them, not Muslims. Then on the issue of slavery in America, because many of these discussions are being had in America by Americans, right? There's a level of cultural sensitivity that has to be taken into consideration here. Because when we say slavery, there are people whose ancestry is intricately tied to slavery. There are revert Muslims whose ancestry is tied to slavery in America. And so the nuance, and for them, it has an impact on how they believe Islam should be, and what you're telling them Islam is. When you insist we are slave-owning people and we are proud of that. Consider for once the feelings of those who became Muslim, want to become Muslim, who have had already a long time and the difficult time reconciling this with their place in the world. Right? I've read many memoirs of ex-slaves to have empathy, to understand from their perspective how does it feel like to be a slave. And I think those who want to advocate for slavery need to read these books. So you can understand what it really feels like and what it means in America, because it's an American context. When you say slavery, they imagine this form of slavery. That's what they imagine. Does Islam really champion this? Do I have to accept this to be a Muslim? Am I a lesser Muslim because I don't accept this? a bit of intelligence would go a long way. So this is for people who want to study. Uncle Tom's Cabin, I would say highly recommended. It is, of course, fictional. It is highly recommended. An incidents in the life of a slave girl and Frederick Douglass, same thing. And I would also recommend, if you have time, again for cultural awareness, Emmett Till. Whether you watch the movie, or whether you take a documentary, watch it. These are people who are, there are many who are still alive, by the way, within living memory of what the after effect of slavery looks like in America. I think those who are involved in da'wah, who want to impress upon the American public that we are proud to be slave owners, need to watch these documentaries, okay, to understand the psyche and the trauma that many people have to live with. There are many people who love Islam, who want to be Muslim, or have at least an affinity to Islam. This is not the message we want to put to them before anything else. Focus on Tawheed, focus on other things. This is not the primary goal of da'wah, to prove that we love having slaves or having concubines. Right? Because there is a reality on the ground. There is a large proportion of people in that country, in America, who are, as I said, intricately linked to this experience and are still recovering. You don't go to somebody recovering from a sickness and show them what caused the sickness in the first place and boast of that. You don't do that. Right? So it's important, if you're giving da'wah in a certain place where slavery is very important as a topic, is very controversial, be culturally intelligent and sensitive. Okay, what is the benefit in talking about this issue and insisting on this issue when there are other priorities in society? So I recommend you watch this documentary if you have the time, and you will feel, what maybe somebody else is feeling when they're here time and time again. Is part of our deen, and we have to insist upon it. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. That's a very long document, a very long presentation. If there are any questions, now would be the time.
Welcome to HistoryUn, the world's leading online learning platform specializing in Islamic history. To discover the HistoryUn mobile app and participate in regular live and interactive seminars and tune in directly from your handset from anywhere in the world. Enjoy instant access to a growing catalog of on-demand streaming content exclusive to the platform, accessible from a variety of devices including desktops, tablets, and cell phones. Connect instantly with our global community of history enthusiasts via our private community forum. To find out more about our online history programs and resources, visit our website today at www.historyun.com.